The vast emptiness of space enveloped the starship Erebus, a vessel of exploration and discovery. It glided silently through the cosmos, a speck of life and light in the infinite darkness. Captain Elaine Harrow, an explorer of the third generation with a gaze as sharp as her intellect, commanded the ship with an air of quiet confidence. "Starboard sensors picking up an anomaly," called out Lieutenant Diaz, the ship's pilot. His eyes were fixed on the blinking console in front of him. Elaine leaned over his shoulder, peering at the data. "Define anomaly," she said. "Looks like a floating rock, but it's humming," Diaz replied, adjusting the frequency on the console. The science officer, Dr. Simon Fletcher, a man whose enthusiasm for the unknown was rivaled only by his untamed beard, piped up from his station. "A humming rock? Now that's music to my ears." The crew shared a brief, tense chuckle. As the Erebus approached the anomaly, the view on the main screen became clearer. It was an artifact, jet black and geometric, utterly foreign in design. Its surface was smooth, almost glossy, reflecting the distant stars. "Looks like something out of an old sci-fi flick," muttered Jasper, the engineer, unable to hide his awe. His hands, always ready for action, fidgeted with a tool absently. Elaine's eyes narrowed as she studied the monolith. "Diaz, bring us closer. Let's get a better look." The Erebus maneuvered closer, the hum from the artifact growing louder, vibrating through the hull. It was a deep, resonant sound that seemed to bypass the ears and echo directly in their chests. "Captain, are we sure about this?" asked Dr. Yuna Kim, the ship's medic, her voice tinged with caution. "We don't know what that thing is." Elaine considered her words, then replied, "Curiosity outweighs caution in this case, Doctor. We're here to explore the unknown." The artifact loomed larger on the screen, its presence imposing and mysterious. As they drew nearer, the crew felt a subtle shift in the air, a faint charge that made the hair on their arms stand. Jasper joked nervously, "Hope that thing doesn't start singing. I left my dancing shoes back on Earth." Simon chuckled. "If it starts a choir, I'm joining in. Could use a good sing-along." The banter masked their underlying unease as the Erebus extended its grappling arms, securing the artifact. The ship shuddered slightly as it took hold, the hum now a constant, omnipresent background noise. "All right, team," Elaine announced. "Let's find out what secrets this relic holds, but stay sharp. We don't know what we're dealing with here." As the crew set about their tasks, the artifact sat silently in the cargo hold, its hum a whisper from the void. In the sterile confines of the Erebus's lab, the ancient artifact stood enigmatic and silent, save for its persistent, low hum. The crew, now accustomed to its presence, went about their duties with a mix of fascination and unease. Captain Elaine Harrow observed her crew, noting the subtle changes in their behavior. "How's the analysis coming, Simon?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the black monolith. Dr. Simon Fletcher, peering through a microscope, responded without looking up. "It's unlike anything we've ever seen. The material isn't on the periodic table, and it's emitting a frequency that's, well, it's odd." Lieutenant Diaz, leaning against the doorframe, chimed in. "Odd how? Like, we're all going to turn into aliens odd? Or, my radio's going to start playing 80s hits odd?" Simon chuckled. "Somewhere in between, I'd wager." Jasper, tinkering with a sensor array nearby, added, "As long as it doesn't play country music, I'm good." Their banter was cut short when Dr. Yuna Kim entered, her face etched with concern. "Captain, I need to report something. The crew, they're experiencing headaches, disorientation. It's been escalating since we brought that thing aboard." Elaine's expression hardened. "Any idea why?" Yuna shook her head. "Not yet. It could be stress, but I'm not ruling out exposure to the artifact." In the background, the ship's botanist, Mara, was examining the plant specimens. "You guys might want to see this," she called out. The crew gathered around as she pointed to a plant whose leaves had begun to curl and twist in unnatural patterns. "That's not normal," Jasper retorted, eyebrows raised. Mara replied, "In my years of botany, I've never seen anything like it. It's like the plants are reacting to the artifact's frequency." Simon peered closer. "Fascinating. It's as if the artifact is communicating with them on some level then. Diaz rubbed his temples, trying to ease his headache. Great, that's just great. A sense of foreboding settled over the crew. The artifact's influence was creeping into every corner of the ship, unseen but deeply felt. As the crew dispersed to continue their investigations, Elaine stayed behind, staring at the monolith. She wondered if they had uncovered a marvel of the cosmos or unleashed something far beyond their control. The interior of the Erebus was bathed in the soft glow of artificial lights, a stark contrast to the deep blackness of space outside. The crew moved with a sense of unease. The artifact's hum a constant, unyielding presence. Jasper, the engineer, was the first to break the silence that had fallen over the crew's communal meal. Anyone else having weird dreams lately? Dr. Simon Fletcher, sitting across from him, answered. I've been having bad dreams as well. Lieutenant Diaz joined in. My dreams have been an endless void, whispering voices. It's like being in a bad horror vid. Captain Elaine Harrow, observing the interactions, decided to address the elephant in the room. It's not just the dreams, is it? There's something about that artifact. It's affecting us. Dr. Una Kim nodded, her expression serious. I've been logging the symptoms. Headaches, auditory hallucinations, even visual disturbances. It's escalating. Simon interjected. And let's not forget the plants in the lab. They're practically doing backflips. Whatever this thing is emitting, it's not just noise. It's resonating with us, on a biological level. Jasper, fidgeting with his fork, added quietly, I thought I heard whispers last night, in the cargo bay. Mara, the botanist, looked up sharply. Whispers? What kind of whispers? Like someone speaking just out of earshot. Couldn't make out any words, though. Jasper replied, his usual jovial demeanor gone. The table fell silent, each member lost in their thoughts. Elaine stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. We need to keep a close eye on this. Everyone, log any unusual experiences, no matter how insignificant they seem. Una, Simon, I want you two to work on finding out what's causing this. The rest of us will continue with our duties, but stay alert. The air inside the Erebus had grown tense, like the charged calm before a storm. The crew's interactions were marked by a cautious, wary undertone. In the dimly lit corridors, their conversations were hushed, punctuated by the ever-present hum of the artifact. In the mess hall, Dr. Simon Fletcher and Lieutenant Diaz were huddled over a cup of coffee, their voices low. Have you seen Jasper today? Simon asked, his brow furrowed in concern. Diaz shook his head. No, and that's odd. He usually beats me to the coffee machine. Meanwhile, in the cargo bay, Captain Elaine Harrow and Dr. Una Kim found Jasper. He was huddled in a corner, his body convulsing unnaturally, his skin taking on a sickly, translucent hue. God, what's happening to him? Una exclaimed, rushing to his side with her medical kit. Elaine, her voice steady but laced with urgency, called for assistance. We need to quarantine him now. As they moved Jasper to the medical bay, the crew gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Jasper's body continued to twist and contort, his once familiar features now alien and grotesque. In the medical bay, Una worked frantically to stabilize Jasper. His DNA... It's like it's being rewritten, she muttered in disbelief. Simon, peering through the observation window, added, It's the artifact. It's not just resonating with us mentally. It's changing us physically. Diaz, standing beside him, quipped, Well, I always said Jasper was a bit of an oddball, but this is a whole new level. No one laughed. Elaine addressed the crew, her voice firm. We keep Jasper under observation and quarantine. No one enters without my express permission. We can't risk whatever this is spreading. Mara, the botanist, spoke up, her voice trembling. Captain, what if we can't stop this? What if we're all... changing? Elaine met her gaze, resolute yet empathetic. We face it head-on, Mara. We're a crew. We stick together, and we'll get through this. We need to get to the bottom of this. Simon, while looking at the captain, Maybe we need to toss the artifact and get as far away from it as possible, Captain. Then, as if the artifact knew the crew was onto it, The lights in the Erebus flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows along the corridors. The ship's systems were suddenly failing in inexplicable ways, as if the artifact's presence was slowly digesting the very fabric of the vessel. Elaine responded, "We need to figure out first what it's doing. Tossing it out into space might not do anything at all at this point." Later in the dim light of the bridge, Captain Elaine Harrow and Lieutenant Diaz were examining a flickering console. "These malfunctions don't make any sense," Elaine muttered, her frustration evident. "It's like the ship is becoming alive." Meanwhile, Jasper's transformation had taken a horrifying turn. His body had begun to merge with the ship's systems, his flesh intertwining with cables and metal. Simon and Una, observing from a safe distance, exchanged worried glances. "Is he becoming part of the ship?" Simon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Una, her eyes wide with shock, replied, "It's like the artifact's resonance is rewriting not just his DNA, but the ship's structure as well." As they spoke, a scream echoed through the ship. The crew rushed towards the source of the sound, finding Mara, the botanist, in a state of panic. She was pointing at a crew member, or what used to be a crew member, now twisted and merged grotesquely with the wall paneling. "This can't be happening," Mara sobbed. "Someone wake me up from this nightmare." Elaine, trying to maintain order, addressed the crew. "We need to stick together, now more than ever. Whatever this is, we can't let it break us." The crew nodded, though their faces were etched with fear. The Erebus had become a haunted house in space, each corner holding a new terror. In the mess hall, the crew gathered, seeking solace in each other's company. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and the once strong bonds of camaraderie were fraying under the strain. Simon, looking around at his fellow crew members, said, "We're scientists, explorers. We've faced the unknown before. We can't let this thing beat us." Elaine nodded, her resolve firming. "Simon's right. We're not just going to sit here and wait for this thing to consume us. We're going to fight back." But as the lights continued to flicker and the hum of the artifact grew louder, a sense of hopelessness settled over the crew. The Erebus was no longer their ship. It was a prison, and the artifact was the warden. The interior of the Erebus had taken on an oppressive, stifling atmosphere. The crew, once a tight-knit group of explorers, now moved with a haunted, cautious demeanor, jumping at shadows and whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. In the ship's lab, Dr. Simon Fletcher and Dr. Una Kim were poring over data from the artifact, which continued to emit its haunting frequency. "The resonance patterns are unlike anything I've ever seen," Simon said, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "It's as if it's communicating directly with our cells." Una, looking equally exhausted, added, "And it's not just mental anymore, it's physical. The changes, they're just the beginning." Their discussion was interrupted by Captain Elaine Harrow, who entered with Lieutenant Diaz. "Any progress?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. Simon shook his head. "It's like trying to decipher a language that doesn't want to be understood." Meanwhile, in the ship's corridors, Mara, the botanist, and Jasper, now partially merged with the ship, were having a strained conversation. Jasper's voice, distorted and otherworldly, echoed through the metal and wires he was entwined with. "I can hear it, Mara. The artifact. It's speaking to us all." Jasper's voice was a mixture of awe and terror. Mara, her face pale, replied, "What is it saying?" "It speaks of the cosmos, of ancient horrors and forgotten worlds. It's a song, calling to something or someone." Back in the mess hall, the crew was attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Diaz was trying to rally the crew's spirits. "Come on, folks. We're not going to let some cosmic rock get the better of us, are we?" His words were met with half-hearted responses. The crew was visibly shaken, the whispers and the growing sense of an unseen presence wearing them down. Elaine, sitting apart from the group, was deep in thought. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the artifact's influence was growing stronger. She stood up, addressing the crew with a newfound determination. "We can't let fear rule us. We're going to fight this. Whatever this artifact is calling to, we won't let it answer." As she spoke, the lights flickered more violently, and a deep, guttural roar seemed to resonate through the ship. The crew looked around in panic, realizing that their situation was far worse than they had imagined. The artifact wasn't just affecting them, it was heralding the arrival of something far more sinister. The confines of the Erebus had become a labyrinth of shadows and fear. The crew moved in groups, never alone, as an unseen predator stalked them through the ship's corridors. The air was thick with tension, each creak and groan of the ship sending shivers down their spines. In the dimly lit control room, Captain Elaine Harrow and Lieutenant Diaz were studying the ship's internal sensors, trying to track the movements of the unseen entity. "It's like chasing a ghost," Diaz muttered, his eyes darting between the flickering screens. Elaine, her focus unwavering, replied, "A ghost that's picking us off one by one. We need to find it, and then isolate it." The door hissed open, and Dr. Simon Fletcher rushed in, his face pale. "It's in the vents," he gasped, moving through the ship like it's part of it. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Dr. Yuna Kim and Mara were tending to a crew member who had narrowly escaped an encounter with the entity. His descriptions were fragmented, filled with terror. It was just a shadow, but it was alive, moving like smoke, like darkness made flesh. Mara, her hands trembling as she applied a bandage, whispered, "How do we fight something we can barely see?" Back in the control room, Elaine was formulating a plan. "We can't keep running. We need to draw it out, confront it." Simon, looking over the ship's schematics, suggested, "The cargo bay. It's large enough to trap it, and we can use the shield emitter controls to our advantage." Elaine nodded in agreement. "All right, let's set a trap. But be ready for anything. This thing is part of the ship now, part of the artifact's influence." As the crew set about preparing the cargo bay, the sense of impending confrontation was palpable. They moved with purpose, but their eyes betrayed their fear. The Erebus had become a hunting ground, and they were the prey. The cargo bay of the Erebus was transformed into an arena of sorts. As they set up the environmental controls to create a trap, Diaz tried to inject some bravado into the situation. "So, who's going to tell the ghost it's trespassing?" "I vote for Simon." Simon, adjusting a sensor, replied dryly, "Thanks, but I'll leave the ghost busting to you, Diaz. I'm just the science guy." Elaine, checking her weapon, interjected, "Focus, both of you. We need to be ready for anything. Whatever this thing is, it's more than just a ghost." Yuna, her hands steady despite the situation, added, "We've all seen what it can do. We can't underestimate it." As they finalized their preparations, the lights in the cargo bay dimmed, a sign that the entity was near. The crew took defensive positions, their eyes scanning the darkened room for any sign of the predator. Suddenly, the entity manifested, a swirling mass of shadows and malice. It moved with unnatural speed, darting between the crew members who fired their weapons at it. The air was filled with the sound of gunfire and shouts. Amidst the turmoil, Mara was suddenly seized by the entity. Her terrified screams filled the air around the bay, resonating off the walls as she was dragged into the wall itself. Her cries took on a chilling, metallic timbre as she merged unnaturally with the bulkhead. Nearby, Diaz, who was closest to her, made a desperate attempt to rescue her. He lunged forward, reaching out to grasp her, but an invisible force repelled him violently backward. The crew regrouped, their faces etched with horror and resolve. Elaine shouted over the noise, "We need to drive it towards the trap. Keep firing." The entity, as if sensing their plan, became more aggressive, its attacks more frenzied. Simon, working frantically at a console, yelled, "Now! Activate the trap!" The shield emitters kicked in, trapping the entity. Then in that area, they dropped the temperature, the cold biting into its skin. The entity's movement slowed, its form becoming more solid, more vulnerable. Seizing the opportunity, the crew concentrated their fire on the entity. The sound of gunfire was deafening, the flashes of light casting grotesque shadows on the walls. In a final act of desperation, the entity lashed out, injuring several crew members, including Diaz, who grunted in pain. "That's going to leave a mark," he gasped, clutching his side. Elaine, standing over the weakening form of the entity, delivered the final shot. The entity let out a piercing scream before dissipating into the air, leaving behind a chilling silence. The crew, battered and exhausted, looked around at the aftermath of their battle. The cargo bay was a scene of destruction. Elaine, her expression grim, addressed the crew. "We did it, but this is far from over. We need to get rid of the artifact. It's the source of all this. In the aftermath of their harrowing encounter, the air heavy with a mix of relief and lingering fear. The artifact, the root of their nightmare, stood ominously silent, as if mocking their efforts. Captain Elaine Harrow, her face etched with exhaustion and determination, addressed her crew. "We need to eject this thing into space. It's brought nothing but death and madness." Dr. Simon Fletcher, his hands still trembling from the ordeal, nodded in agreement. "It's not just a piece of ancient history, it's a beacon, and I'm afraid of what it might still be calling." Lieutenant Diaz, nursing a wound, managed a weak smile. "Well, let's not stick around to find out. I've had enough alien horror to last a lifetime." As they rigged the artifact to be ejected, Dr. Yuna Kim voiced a concern that hung in the air like a thick fog. "What if ejecting it doesn't stop this? What if it's already too late?" Elaine met her gaze, her voice steady. "Then we face whatever comes. We have no other choice." Days later, the ship approached a remote space station, its docking procedure eerily silent and automatic. However, after docking, no one disembarked from the vessel. An inspection team boarded cautiously, only to discover the Erebus completely deserted. No trace of the crew remained. Amidst the ghostly quiet, the only anomaly they encountered was a strange black artifact, mysteriously placed in the central chamber of the ship. Its origins and purpose unknown, the artifact exuded a chilling frequency, leaving the station crew uneasy about what secrets it might hold, but eager to unravel them.